The town of Dry Creek was little more than a pause on the highway, a scattering of brick storefronts with painted windows and a water tower that cast a long stilt-legged shadow over late afternoons. Default text people didn't plan to end up there. They were diverted by weather, fatigue, or the subtle magnetism of a mistake. On the edge of town, sycamores pressed their pale hands against the sky and half hid the Ashthorne Hotel, a 3-story relic whose white trim had surrendered to the color of old bones. The sign, a frame of rust with a single flickering tube, promised vacancies in a wavering cough of neon, as if the building cleared its throat to speak and thought better of it. Everyone in Dry Creek knew the Ashthorne should have been condemned. The roof had been repaired the lazy way, by patching over leaks with tar that congealed like blood. The carpet had devoured hundreds of spills and kept their stains in a private gallery. The wallpaper held to the walls by will, paste, and the sentimental clutch of mold. The locals didn't stay there, at least not anymore. They kept stories about it like children keep pebbles in their pockets, smoothed by fingers, ready to be produced with a shrug. The elevator never worked, the owner never aged, and the guests who went up the stairs did not come back down the same way. On the last Friday of November, a storm rolled in with a spine-jangling wind and rain that traveled sideways. Mara Jensen was alone in a car that still wore the plates of a state she'd just left behind, bound for a job that would pay less than the rent it required, and a city where she knew no one. She had promised herself she would not stop. She would push through the night, gulping gas station coffee until the map ran out of miles. But promises dissolve under cold and dark and the hypnotic metronome of wiper blades, and when the road vanished under a silver sheen, she conceded. The Ashthorne sign floated up through the rain, a faint, sickly halo, and desperation presented it as a gift. She pulled in, parked beneath the eave, and waded through a wind that felt like something trying to push her back. Inside, the lobby smelled of lemon polish poured over damp. The floorboards were shabby and old, murmuring under her steps. A bell waited on the counter, its dome mottled with a brass disease, and when Mara tapped it, the sound rang too long, as if tunnels ran behind the walls and carried the chime away. A tall man emerged from a door that had been painted shut and reopened badly. His hair was silver, not white, but the nickel shade of keys, combed straight back with a fastidiousness that felt like a chosen religion. His suit was too black, which made the wearer appear cut out of the world around him. His skin had an indoor pallor, as if sunlight had once offended him and been refused after.
"Good evening,"
he said, his voice precisely oiled. Weather's turned inhospitable. That's one word, Mara said, pushing wet hair from her face.
Do you have any rooms?
He finished with a polite bow. We do. You're fortunate. We've just had an opening. He set a ledger on the counter. Not a laptop, not a cracked tablet. An actual book with marbled edges and a ribbon like a dried vein.
You keep it on paper?
Mara asked, smiling despite herself. "We keep things," he said, and the smile he returned was the ghost of one, a smile that knew the recipe, but not the taste. She signed her name. He watched how the letters lay down. M-A-R-A, like they mattered. "Mr. Grady," he said, sliding her a key with a tarnished fob shaped like a leaf. "Room 313, end of the hall." The number landed inside her with a brief cold that she swallowed. It was silly. Numbers were not omens unless you fed them. The staircase was a patient climb, each riser holding the memory of other feet. The third-floor hallway smelled faintly of soap made from something that had once been alive. The carpet was a red garden, worn to dirt down the center. The damask wallpaper, a green that had negotiated with time and won only its bleached outline. The door to 313 yielded to the key with a reluctant little sigh. The room inside was staged for another century. A bed with a carved headboard, lamps wearing fringed skirts, a dresser whose drawers understood secrets, and across from the bed, a mirror large enough to be a window. The frame had been cut from a single dark length of wood into a twisting of vines and small fruit, the kind of thing that made you want to touch it, and also made you sure you shouldn't. Mara dropped her duffel on a fainting chair that had never honestly fainted and checked her phone. No service. She tried the Wi-Fi out of habit. The network that appeared, Ashthorne, was followed by a lock symbol and a description that read, "Ask at desk." But she didn't want to owe the desk anything more than money. The storm moved in her bones, a shower from a faucet that coughed and then remembered how to be a river, a towel that smelled of a clean that wasn't quite clean, a t-shirt and socks, an attempt at reading, a surrender to the bed's sunken embrace. She drifted at the edge of sleep, tugged forward by the white noise of rain. The knock came like a minor punctuation. 1, 2, 3. Not urgent, not impatient. A measured request for admission. She sat up, her heart ticking against her ribs in a startled echo. The clock on the nightstand glowed. 12:03.
Hello?
She called, feeling silly, and less so when the hallway answered with nothing. She swung her feet to the floor, crossed to the door, and pressed her eye to the peephole. A corridor green as an old bruise, a light at the far end doing the work of surviving, dust suspended for however long dust can hold its breath. No one there. When she closed the door again, the mirror gave a little shiver, a ripple like a held-in flinch. She told herself it was vibration, old walls complaining in a familiar language. The bed took her back. Sleep did not. Her first dream dragged the room down into some damp basement of itself. The wallpaper came away in her hands, leaving raw plaster crossed with the pale stitches of lath. The carpet was no longer carpet, but a sponge for dark water. The lamps sweated soot. The bed lost its linens and watched a stain spread with the patience of ivy. There was the sound of someone crying outside the door, not dramatic, but tired, the crying of someone who realized there was nothing to negotiate. The knob rattled in its socket. Then the door burst inward, and a woman stumbled through. Her nightgown might have been white once, her hair the kind that must have been brushed 100 careful strokes every evening by a pair of hands that knew the map of her scalp. Now the hair hung in ropes, lacquered by smoke and wet. She pressed both hands to her throat. Her eyes, wide and lucid, begged the room to change its mind. No scream came out of her. Trying to scream was the whole of her. Mara woke with the echo of that non-sound still in her ears, a thick silence that felt like residue. The clock said 3:13. Lightning stitched the heavy curtains and, for an instant, lit the mirror's surface as if from within. In that pale backlight, Mara saw herself sitting up, and behind herself, the woman in the nightgown, her hands still at her throat, tilting her head like a robin, listening for a worm. When Mara turned in the real room, there was no one to turn to. By morning, the edges of the dream filed themselves into the drawer where dreams go to be reinterpreted. Downstairs, the lobby's coffee was the color of a kept promise and tasted like burnt bread. Mr. Grady read a newspaper whose date belonged to another decade as if it were a new scandal. "Sleep well?" he asked, not looking up.
Fine,
Mara said, because fine is a bridge word, and she was crossing something she didn't want to name.
the mirror in my room is old.
He turned a page and let it settle. Some things at the Ashthorne endure,
It felt.
she began, and stopped. What word covers a mirror that feels inhabited? Alive, he supplied. When she did not answer, he looked up, the silver of his hair a crown that suited him too well. "We can move you to another room," he offered.
No. Thanks.
She said quickly, as if refusing a second helping.
I have to get back on the road anyway.
Outside, the rain had thinned to a drift, rearranging in the light. Mara packed, checked out, and slid behind the wheel. The first twist of the key produced a click and a slight hiccup of the dashboard. The second twist produced nothing at all. The storm had taken her battery's courage with it. She closed her eyes, counted to 5, and tried again. The car remained a sculpture of a car. She glanced toward the hotel and found Mr. Grady standing in the doorway, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence she hadn't known she was writing. "Trouble?" he asked when she trudged back under the groaning awning.
Battery.
She said.
And no service.
"Storms do interfere with transmissions," he said with something like sympathy. And then, "We'll arrange a tow in the morning. You're welcome to stay another night on the house." The offer settled on her shoulders, warm at first, then heavier.
Thank you.
She said, because that is what one says, and followed him back to the ledger, where her signature from last night had bled slightly through the page like a bruise growing under skin. The second night, the hallway was listening harder. Mara locked the door twice in her room, not because locks keep out what is already inside, but because doing nothing is intolerable. She left the bathroom light on, a square of domestic safety cut into the dark, and lay on her side watching the corner of the mirror where light met frame. Around midnight, the room's temperature withdrew, hand over hand, until her breath pooled in front of her, and the metal drawer pulls grew as cold as the moon. The humming began like a mouth closed over a note. It came from the mirror behind it and from nowhere at once. The surface of the glass loosened, and water decided to be water again. A hand pressed from the other side, palm first, gray, as if made of old smoke. The hand traced a slow, damp arc up the inside of the mirror, as though reacquainting itself with something it had loved.
No.
Mara said, not to the hand, but to the path she could feel opening under her feet. The face arrived after, pale, smooth, and wrong in the way of faces glimpsed at the bottom of a deep well. The eyes were too present, the lips parted. Mara didn't hear words. She received them. He keeps us here. The mirror calmed, infinitesimally. Her phone, useless all day, chose that moment to vibrate with a hungry insect insistence. She snatched it as if the cord connecting her to the world had been returned. The screen presented an incoming call from unknown. When she returned to the room, the mirror had settled into the performance of being a mirror. Her reflection stood there with her, obedient, except for one wrong detail that stole her breath. In the reflection, the bed behind her was empty. In the room, the quadrangle of her body depressed the mattress. She did not want to look at the bed. She did. Something lay under the sheet, a shape very close to her shape, turned on its side the way she had been lying, as if she had left a version of herself behind and it had warmed into occupancy. She understood that a scream would bring Mr. Grady faster than a prayer, and she did scream because any witness was better than none. It took exactly long enough for her to realize that she had not heard footsteps in the hallway before the door opened and Mr. Grady entered without the courtesy of a knock. He took in the room with a single sweep and showed neither surprise nor embarrassment nor anger. "Room 313, he said softly, as if confirming a catalog number. "You should have asked to be moved,"
There's someone in the bed.
Mara said, beating her pulse into each word. You weren't meant to go back," he said, and his gentleness made the words worse than cruelty would have. "Back where?" "Where she is," he said. "The glass has its own rooms." He gestured for her to follow, and against the gravity of her fear, she did, because some choices are a series of smaller choices that began before you. He unlocked a door opposite her room, one with a key whose teeth looked handmade. Inside, A storage space revealed itself as a mausoleum for the hotel's past. Portraits with their faces turned inward, chairs that remembered backs, a trunk with a shipping label for a ship whose name had been painted over by waves. In the center leaned a mirror, the twin of hers, its carved frame more ivy than wood. "This hung in 313 until the fire," he said.
There was a fire.
She repeated, and it wasn't a question. 1954, he confirmed. A honeymoon couple. Their names are unimportant. Names are a way of pretending we are different from one another. His reflection in the mirror arrived a fraction late. They argued, he continued. We try to keep all arguments in the lobby now. That night, the alarm woke the second floor. By the time I reached the door, the paint had softened and the knob burned my hand. They broke it down with a halberd from the wall, donated by a veteran who wanted the hotel to look history in the eye. Inside, smoke and a smell like pennies. She was on the floor, very near the mirror. He was not there to be found. Some say he jumped. Others say he walked through. Mara swallowed. Her spit tasted of copper.
And you still rent the room?
The Ashthorne is not a charity, he said, nor is it a church. It is a house for staying. Some stays are long. His tone made long into forever's little brother.
You could have warned me.
She said. I offered another room, he said, and the way he said it felt like an absolution he was proud to grant himself. She turned and ran, and the hallway lengthened obligingly to accommodate her fear. Packing is faster when you are fleeing. She put her life back into the duffel with the frantic geometry of someone stuffing snow into their pockets before it melts. The mirror darkened as if clouds had drifted inside it. The room's edges drew closer, elastic snapping back. She grabbed her keys without knowing why. Keys are a superstition in the pocket. The doorknob fought her. The door held. She put all her weight into it, the old shoulder trick, and felt nothing but the counterweight of the building itself. The temperature dropped toward the cellars that the house had never had. Frost wrote its cursive on the window. The mirror's humming amplified, a tuning fork struck by a hand that would not stop. Faces emerged from the black like pale coins flipping in slow water. Not just the woman from her dream, dozens of people, layer by layer, each with a hungry bewilderment of someone trapped inside a metaphor they had not agreed to. Help us, they mouthed, some angry, some polite, some plainly uninterested in the request, but saying it out of habit. A crack traced the mirror's surface, thin as a hair, then a nervous spider finding its way. When the first hand pushed through, it carried the cold with it, like smoke carries smell. It opened and closed in the air, learning the space. Mara did the only irrationally rational thing available, and hurled her duffel at the glass apparition. The mirror burst inward, and the shards did not fall. They swirled, suspended by a logic that belonged to whirlpools and clocks. Out of that glittering center crawled the woman in the nightgown, wet with something that did not wet the carpet. "He keeps us here," she said, and the voice was not in the room, but inside Mara's bones, where marrow listens. The door unlatched without her hand on it. Mr. Grady stood framed there, as polite as a postcard. "I told you not to go back," he said, and the way he looked at the crawling woman was not surprised, not horrified. It was managerial. Mara shoved past him and ran for the stairs. Her bare feet slapped out a terrified metronome. The lobby received her like a mouth. She threw herself at the front doors. They were doors, and they were also a wall, and also a suggestion of the idea of doors. They did not move. She pounded at them until the tendons in her wrists sang. In the black mirror of the glass, she saw Mr. Grady coming up behind her. His reflection smiled first. "You don't understand," he said, and his kindness felt scalding. "Every hotel needs a caretaker." He put his hand on her shoulder. He whirled tipped. The ceiling became the floor a page turning, the air a substance that had decided on another shape. Sunlight, a pale morning with frost still reluctant to leave the edges of things. The room, obedient, the bed beneath her, convincing, the mirror across from the bed. A painting of a mirror, done by someone who has only ever heard descriptions of mirrors. She sat up. The light fell where light falls. She smiled with relief at the simple, humiliating miracle of being alive. And then she saw that the woman in the mirror had not sat up. The woman in the mirror remained lying down, watching her with a composure that made composure into a threat. The woman in the mirror smiled a faint, almost pitying smile. Mara moved toward the glass, and neither did the woman. Panic is an organ that swells. She put her hands on the mirror, and the mirror did not give the way glass gives. It was colder than ice that had decided not to melt, even when begged. She shouted, and the shout happened only inside her head. The door opened with a courteous click. Mr. Grady entered, carrying a glass of water that did not spill. "Welcome back, Miss Jensen," he said, placing the glass neatly on the nightstand for the version of her that might need it.
I'm glad you've decided to stay. Let me go,
she said, and the words left no trace on the air. "I'm afraid that isn't the arrangement," he said. "You see, the Ashthorne was not built to be empty. Rooms have expectations. Mirrors have appetites." He adjusted the curtains by 2 inches. "Guests never truly check out. Not from here." He looked into the mirror, then met her gaze like a teacher meets a child through a classroom window. "There are ways to be helpful," he said mildly. "People listen better when they think they are talking to themselves." He left. The door closed with a sound like an eyelid. Time changes its costume when it enters glass. Days were measurable by the square of light creeping across the carpet, the wall, the ceiling, and not at all. At night, the mirror hum became a choir rehearsing. Mara learned the company she kept. A boy had come with his parents in the 70s, traveling from Ohio to California because California was where people went to become their idea of themselves. He pressed small, sticky hands to the glass and asked everyone if they had seen his red truck. A woman in a church dress spoke to someone no one else could see and called him Pastor, even as she accused him. A man with the long, slow patience of fishermen watched the door as if he expected weather to come through it. There were dozens more, layered like the rings in a tree stump, each a year the Ashthorne had decided not to share. They could see one another the way reflections sometimes do, at angles, through doubles, in glancing overlap. They could make motives with eyebrows and sorrow with the set of a mouth. A few could push breath across the glass, fog it with the effort of speaking, trace letters that faded into nothing as quickly as they could be drawn. Once, during a damp spring that smelled like wet laundry, Mara managed 4 letters before the humidity stole her ink. S-T-A-Y. She had meant stay away, but the second word had no time to grow. A family checked in that afternoon. The mother was tired and hid inside jokes. The father had a wristwatch that said he lived outside, but not for himself. Mara watched from the mirror as their child, a girl with 2 new front teeth and the solemnity of new permanence, marched to the glass and pressed her nose. "Hello," the girl said, with the confidence of 3 syllables. The girl's breath made a small oval cloud. Mara drew 1 word into it, with the shame of needing to run. The cloud evaporated into nothing a moment before the mother turned her head. The girl blinked. "The lady in a mirror is sad," she announced. The mother laughed, the way mothers laugh when carrying fear like groceries. "Mirrors don't have ladies, honey," she said, and that year in the glass grew another ring. Grew. Dry Creek carried on with its remembering. The bakery turned out cinnamon rolls that tasted like the town wished mornings tasted. The bar served beer to men who called each other by last names that were first names in older languages. The weather came and wore the water tower's paint more thinly. Some nights, people driving through would see light in a top-floor window, a pearly square of someone not sleeping. They would say to the person in the passenger seat, "Look, someone actually stays there." And the passenger would look and say, "Huh." And by the time they reached the far edge of the town, the hotel would already be a story that had happened to other people. Whatever call storms decided again, one September, to gather their skirts and dance over the valley. The roads became intentions rather than facts. A couple, newly married by a courthouse that smelled like floor cleaner and old arguments, lost the thin blue line of their GPS and fell into Dry Creek as if the town had opened its hands underneath their car. They argued about whether to keep going. Their argument was affectionate, how a dog growls with its tail wagging. The sign glowed ahead, vacancies, trying to convince itself. "We can wait it out," the man said. "It's like a horror movie," the woman said, but she was smiling and had never had the part in a horror movie where the audience starts hissing at the screen. Don't. They parked under the same eave Mara had once believed in. Inside, Mr. Grady greeted them with the warmth of a pilot light. "Welcome to the Ashthorne," he said. "We'd love 1 room," the man said, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. "Just until the rain isn't sideways." "Of course," Mr. Grady said. if you'll sign the ledger." He rotated the book. Their names arrived obediently, where names belong. He gave them a key that had been practicing being a key for 70 years. "Room 313, he said. "It's recently become available." "Recently," the woman repeated. A journalist's word. "Vacancy comes and goes," Mr. Grady said. And because he had said it so many times, it sounded like something the hotel had begun to say through him. Mara watched them enter the room and felt the glass flex with their arrival, as a pond yields when a small boat noses out from shore. She had learned things. Mirrors are not only for looking into, they are for looking out of, a tiny distinction that changes architecture. She had learned that the glass is stronger where it has been repaired. The places where it has broken and been reimagined are seams that can be worried open, like mouths that briefly remember how to pronounce a lost word. She had learned that 313 is not an hour, but a hinge, an astronomical joke the building tells itself because it can. She had learned that Mr. Grady is never in a hurry and therefore is always on time. She had learned that despair is lazy and hope is a craft. And if she wanted the craft to float, she had to keep rubbing beeswax into the seams of her will. She began with the thermostat. At 312 and some seconds, she pulled the temperature behind the glass down with her mind, like you pull a blanket over a frightened child. Frost bloomed on the room side of the mirror. The new wife, Claire, spoken once by her husband and bitten by the storm into clay, padded over and touched the glass. "Cold," Claire said. "Like it's winter in there." The husband laughed. "Don't tell me ghosts," he said. And the way he said ghosts was cheerful and wrong. Mara wrote with her breath as the frost gave her a page. She had practiced the letters until they knew her. "Leave. Door won't let you. Window will." The words appeared as clear as old etchings, stayed 3 heartbeats, then ran like ink under rain. Claire recoiled and then leaned, both instincts fighting for the body. "Did you see?" she began. "Condensation," the husband said, because condensation is a word that saves people from having to feel their neck hair rise. But later, when the storm leaned heavier, Claire went to the window alone, tested the sash, and found that while the front door had the weight of law, the window had only the weight of weather. It stuck and yielded an inch, another, then a complaint screech as it clawed upward. Mr. Grady appeared on the usual schedule, earlier than any clock warranted. He stood in the doorway with his hands folded in the manner of an apology that is about to be declined. "We discourage open windows in inclement weather," he said. Claire looked at him as if he were a painting she had not chosen to hang. "I saw a message," she said, "on the mirror." "Mirrors accommodate the imagination," he replied. "No," she said. "There were words." He looked into the mirror, and for a moment his face, reflected, wore another expression, a bleakness so complete it made beauty of itself, before smoothing back to house style. "Some guests have trouble sleeping," he said gently. "We like to think the Ashthorne helps." He lowered the window. Much later, Claire watched his hands and thought that she had never seen fingernails so clean. That night, Mara worked every seam she knew. She pulled breath frost across the glass and wrote again and again as the room read and misread. Grab the ledger and names, keep you, and burn paper, break rules. And he didn't jump, he walked through, which made no sense to anyone but the mirrors and Mr. Grady. The husband, Evan, who fit him like a shirt, did not see the words so much as feel the draft of them. But Claire saw them because she had the mind to admit a third option without seizing up. The mirror's hum deepened when the clock argued toward 3:13, and then 1. Faces swam up. Claire did not scream. She looked like a biologist looks through a microscope when the organism on the slide performs something unscheduled. "Who are you?" Claire whispered. The answer came at a slant, the only way answers pass through glass. The ones who forgot how to leave. Claire stepped back, and her heel found the soft give of the carpet. Evan put his hand out without thinking and found hers without looking. "We should go," he said. "Now." They grabbed what could be caught. The front door refused them in the practiced way of old refusals. Evan shouldered it, cursed it, reasoned with it, the way grown men reason with the stubbornness of objects. Claire ran to the desk, where the ledger waited like a sleeping animal. She did not know why her hand shook. She knew only that the mirror had taught her where power lived. When she dragged the ledger toward her, the book did not move so much as shift itself, like a creature sliding further into water. She flipped pages, names, hundreds, thousands, the ink varying over decades, from the confident permanence of fountain pens to the thin scratch of cheap ballpoints. She found Mara Jensen, not by accident, but by how the paper warmed as if a hand were pressed from the other side. She tore the page. The tears sounded like fabric ripping. Mr. Grady appeared. No footsteps, only the change in air that a door makes when it opens to something colder. "Please," he said, and the word was almost gentle enough to undo her. "Don't do that." Claire looked up and, for the first time, saw him the way the building saw him, as a hinge rather than a man. "What happens if I burn it?" she asked, and her own voice startled her with its calm. "You'll start a fire," he said, tilting his head, and for an instant she saw his other head, the one that had bent toward a bride with blood on her throat, the one that had turned away from a window that had been opened to the rain of 1954. Evan came up behind her with a lighter he had not known he still carried in the glove compartment of his life. He flicked flame, and flame remembered what it was for. Mr. Grady's expression did not change. "The Ashthorne keeps what it's owed," he said mildly. "Every house has its arithmetic." "Then change the equation," Claire said, and touched the lighter to the bottom corner of the page. Paper does not scream, but 100 hands pressed suddenly against glass dough. The room's temperature went to extremes. Frost on the mirror, heat near the ledger. Names darkened, curled, lifted like sullen birds and crumbled in the air. The fire was small, too small to eat the whole book, but it was enough to make the rules blink. The front door shuddered like a body on the other side had thrown itself against it. The window in 313 flew up of its own volition and hammered itself back down, not sure which god to obey. In the glass, the faces surged forward, and one face, the woman in the nightgown, pressed closer than any and made the shape of a word. Go. Evan grabbed the ledger to smother the fire, and Claire slapped his hand away and used a bellhop's abandoned cap instead, despising herself for saving anything the hotel wanted saved. Mr. Grady reached across the counter. His hands were very still. You need a caretaker, he said, to the building more than them. You always have. He looked at Claire. His eyes were a color glass forgets. You can leave, he said softly. But you must leave someone behind. The hum of the mirror harmonized with the storm, and in that chord Claire recognized the property deed of the Ashthorne, written in a language that never learned mercy. She thought of the child she'd not yet have, the mornings she had not yet earned, the idea of a porch, shade, and ordinary arguments. She thought of the woman who had written "run" on frost and had learned to write backwards for strangers. Take me, Claire said, before she could call the words back. Evan made the sound that breaks bones inside chests. No, he said, and the no collapsed into a please that had no place to stand. Mr. Grady considered the offer the way a jeweler finds a stone. It must be chosen, he said. It must be willing. I'm not willing, Claire said, her voice shaking. But I'm choosing. The mirrors ratified the paradox by vibrating in a way that made the air buzz in their sinuses. Mara pressed everything she was into the glass. She tried to say not her, and the glass turned what she meant into a flicker. The boy with the red truck pushed beside her. The churchwoman revised a prayer. The fisherman nodded once, the way men nod when the weather changes. Nothing else happened then that none of them had rehearsed in all their years. The ledger coughed up a loose sheet that had stuck to another for decades and was now peeled free by the heat. On it, two signatures lived next to each other, written by the same hand in two different lives, Eleanor Grady and Thomas Grady. The year was 1954. Next to Eleanor, a clerk had written bride, the way people write explanations under pictures. Next to Thomas was a small, precise X in red pencil, a mark used by men who make inventories when they do not want to say what they are counting. Claire stared. Mr. Grady did not. It was you, Claire said, and the sentence broke the room into hideable pieces. You were the husband. He smiled then, not kindly, not cruelly, but with something like fatigue. I have always been the caretaker, he said. The hotel needs a hand to turn its key. You left her, Claire said. You walked through. Someone had to show the way, he replied, and the building agreed, and the mirrors agreed, and Mara understood something with the clarity of a knife. The Ashthorne told itself it was not murder if a door was involved. A choice is a living thing. It sprouted new branches in that instant. Evan, who had never been brave in the ways stories require, did the thing he could do. He picked up the ledger and ran with it toward the door. The door held because doors hold, but a man, a book, and a need collided, and the ledger's spine cracked open. Papers lifted and eddied. Names made weather. Claire grabbed a fistful and flung them into the lobby fireplace that had never burned anything but decoration. This time, it learned the job. Flames took the edges, then the middles. The air filled with the fragile ash of signatures. Mr. Grady moved for the pages, but the woman in the nightgown, Eleanor, stepped out of the mirror, like you stepped out of a coat. Her hands were no longer at her throat. She put one palm on Mr. Grady's chest. He froze, and for the first time since Mara had met him, his expression changed into something that belonged only to him. He looked at Eleanor, and the look was not apology, love, or hate. It was the bewilderment of a man who discovers the house he has been keeping has had rooms he was never invited into. The storm made a decision. The hotel shuddered as if the hill had shrugged. The front door blew inward. Air hammered the lobby like water pouring into a hole. Evan grabbed Claire's wrist, and together they ran, tripping on corners, catching themselves on banisters, guided by the old cunning of animals who smell outside. In the crackle between lightning and thunder, Mara stood at the mirror and did not beg. She pressed her hands to the inside of the glass until the bones in them mapped themselves. "Go," she mouthed. Claire turned just once in the doorway and met Mara's eyes in the way people meet across trains, about to depart. "Thank you," Claire said, and because thanks are a currency that spends on both sides, the glass warmed under Mara's palms for the first time since it had taken her. The couple vanished into the weather, and the weather swallowed their vanishing. Morning found the Ashthorne the way mornings always find places that have decided to remain. The lobby smelled faintly of smoke and the more complicated scent of things recently reconsidered. The ledger on the desk was thinner. Mr. Grady stood behind the counter as if he had slept there. His hair was silver. His suit still makes a man the color of absence. But his left hand was bandaged, and a small nick on his cheek had the honesty of blood. The sign outside flickered its old promise: vacancies. Rooms upstairs exhaled, inhaled, and continued. In 313, the mirror was whole again. It had become what whole means, the 2nd or 10th time. Mara looked out. The faces around her had thinned. The boy with the red truck had vanished suddenly, making her chest ache and feel lighter. The fisherman had set his jaw differently, as if a particular tide had finally turned. Eleanor stood very near, her nightgown miraculously clean. Her throat was unmarked. They looked at each other like women looked at each other when they had the same dream from different beds. "We can try again," Eleanor said, or the mirror translated it that way. Mara nodded. Trying is the only rebellion that matters to walls. That evening, rain returned, gentler now, like a guest deciding to be polite. A car pulled in under the eave. A tired salesman stepped out, carrying 2 suit bags that looked like regrets. He paused at the door, as if listening to local advice he did not have. Inside, Mr. Grady lifted his head and arranged his mouth into hospitality. "Welcome to the Ashthorne," he said, and his voice was the same as last night and the night before and 1954, and the day the first brick had learned what its job would be. "Room?" the man asked. If you have one. We always have one, Mr. Grady said, setting the ledger on the counter. His bandaged hand hesitated over the ribbon. He looked up, and for a long moment he considered the salesman with the human curiosity of a man who has just remembered that choices are made of people. In the lobby mirror, Mara pressed her hands against the glass. The salesman's reflection glanced her way with the imprecise attention of men who have trained themselves not to see women unless invited. Still, when he signed, the ink bled less than it used to. Upstairs, 313 waited with its peculiar patience. Behind the glass, the humming settled into a pitch Mara could hold. She closed her eyes and practiced writing backward with breath. She had time. In this house, time was the one thing that never checked out. Outside, the vacancies sign flickered, steadied, and flickered again, as if torn between telling the truth and telling a story. The sycamores lifted their pale hands in the wind. Dry Creek folded the day into the drawer where it kept most of its days. The Ashthorne did what it had always done. It held. And in 313, in the wide cold of a mirror that had learned to be a mouth, the trapped and the freed, the furious and the faithful, the old and the newly missing, practiced the only language that works on rooms, insistence, and waited for the next knock that came soft and measured, 3 raps in a row, at 12:03.